I feel like when people look at a device like Surface Duo, the reactions to the appearance, like what people, it's the way that they feel. Does it look good? Does it look bad? I feel like that reaction is very, very divided, right? It seems like people either look at this and go, oh my goodness, what a beautiful, incredible looking device. Or they look at it and they say one thing. They say, wow, those bezels are straight out of, and then they name some year, back in the past sometime. And I feel like that's a kind of interesting conversation potentially to have. How bothered are you by these bezels? And what argument can be made for having bezels in the first place? Because I actually think there's somewhat of a reasonable argument to be made there. And I think that this conversation is set to heat up a little bit as we move closer and closer to the launch of the much rumored Google Pixel Notepad, Google Pixel Fold, whatever its name is actually going to be, because as you can see, this device does have quite sizable bezels on the top and bottom, relatively small bezels on the side, but top and bottom, relatively large. So what I did is I took to Twitter and I made a poll and I asked people a very specific question. I said, are you bothered by the bezels on the Pixel Fold? And the options I gave were yes, I won't buy it, yes, but not a deal breaker, and no, it's fine. I was actually kind of heartened to see here the results that at 171 votes, 81% of people were not bothered by the bezels on the Pixel Fold. But, look, 18, 19% of people in my poll were bothered by it to some degree. And it's also really, really important to mention that I am the Surface Duo guy, right? The people that are following me are probably the most unlikely to be bothered by bezels of anybody on the internet. And I think that my personal anecdotal experience kind of does back this up, because this is a comment that I see quite a bit from the more, maybe you'd say the broader, the more mainstream smartphone and tech world. People seem to see anything with bezels on it and get somewhat upset about it. So in this video, we're going to kind of explore this idea. I'm going to tell you why I actually think there's really good reason to have a bezel on a device like the Google Pixel Fold, and why I'm actually kind of excited that Google decided to go this route. So the first thing I want to do here is I kind of want to take a stroll down memory lane, and I want to talk about a particular phone, the LG V30. Now this is probably a little bit of a weird diversion in this video, but I think that it does overall make some sense, because when I bought this phone, when I got this thing in my hands, I was blown away by the size of those bezels. If we go to the overhead camera here, you will see when this thing is unlocked that those, that chin and forehead at the time that this thing was released, this was considered to be like super, super tiny little bezels. And there was actually, a lot of talk about how it was impressive that they were squeezing their selfie camera way up there in the very, very top, the earpiece up there as well. Now, of course, since then, we've gone many, many steps further. Now we have hole punch selfies inside the screen itself. But at the time, this was very, very impressive. And in fact, I prefer this over something like what we see today with the Galaxy Z Fold 4. Now, bear in mind, objective versus subjective, right? Some of this is going to be just my opinion. Some of this is going to be more objective than subjective. But at any rate, just kind of keep that in mind. What we've done here is we have obviously shrunk the bezel pretty substantially, and we have taken that selfie camera and we've put it inside the screen in a hole punch. So that's the first thing that I want to address and talk about here. I do not like the hole punch selfie camera, okay? It is something that after a little bit of time does get a little bit harder to notice, but I still do notice it, from time to time. And just in general, anytime I do notice it and pay attention to it, I do not like it. I think it's ugly. I think it's distracting. A lot of people now have just gotten used to it. Oh, it's par for the course. It's what everybody does now. I don't care. It's not something that I enjoy. Now, another thing that happens when you get tiny little bezels is that sometimes when you're holding the thing, you may wind up actually, pressing on the screen and doing things like that, launching applications and so forth with your hand. Now, palm rejection is a thing, and the software, can kind of block out some of this stuff. But as you can see there, it's not that crazy for me to be, this happens to me. I'll be reaching across the screen, and I've, long pressed on the camera app. It's honestly not that difficult to achieve that mistake on a device like this. Now, on a phone, right? It's not as big of a deal. Really, what I'd say on a phone is that the hole punch is just ugly. Sometimes the palm rejection thing happens. But when you're talking about a larger device, a tablet, it is much more likely to suffer from the palm rejection issues because just the way you have to hold it. It's a larger, heavier device, and you're probably reaching across it further as well at times. So that palm rejection becomes more of a problem. Now, you've also probably noticed that on this device, we've hidden that under display selfie camera underneath the screen. You can still see it, it is still visible, but it is less visible than in the standard hole punch. But this has its own set of issues, the biggest of which is just that the camera quality itself is really, really bad. If we take a selfie with that camera, I mean, you saw it just kind of clear up a little bit, but even still, like this is a selfie picture that is absolutely awful on detail. It's a really bad selfie camera. It's honestly not one that I'm going to want to use. And then if you're someone like me who, maybe is photosensitive in some ways, when this little under display camera is on a brighter, like a white background, the way that it shimmers and so forth actually makes it far more noticeable to me than the hole punch selfie on the cover display. Now, we also have to talk about aspect ratio. Okay, so everyone knows that the Z Fold 4 is kind of a narrow, skinny, tall display, and then whenever you open it up, it kind of, it just doubles up in size. But as a tablet, it is sort of an awkward size and dimension. A lot of people, like myself, would prefer a device that opened up into landscape instead of portrait mode, right? Basically, what we have here is a slightly wider, very, very large phone, not necessarily a tablet. Now, if you rotate it this way, this is much more what I would want this thing to actually open up into. So that is what Google is doing, but then you run into another potential problem whenever you go with this aspect ratio, because now whenever you fold the thing over this way, what you wind up with is a cover display that I think most people would find to be awkwardly short and fat. Now, not myself, I actually would be totally fine with that, but in Google's pursuit of I think making the device more palatable to as many people as possible, they've done something kind of intelligent here. They've kind of used the bezel, right, to make sure that both screens are a normal size, normal aspect ratio. So by doing that, so let's take the Z Fold 4 again, and let's rotate it this way, because this is pretty much the size and shape of the screen on the Pixel Fold. But what they did is they've increased the height, top and bottom, by simply taking the camera and your speaker, whatever, and moving it into a small bezel, okay? Now keep in mind that by doing that, you're adding some height. Then whenever you fold the thing over, you've also added height to the cover display. And I think you can see what I mean here when we look at the device. So the tablet screen has these bezels, top and bottom, but the cover display does not. They're going with the hole punch and very, very thin bezels. So that allows them to avoid the same issue that a lot of other companies are facing, like the Z Fold 4, where you can't really get them. If you do no bezels on the cover display, no bezels on the inner display, it's going to be more difficult to have both displays be a normal size, okay? So if you take a normal phone, I'll just hold up this V30 because it's what's near me, and now you make it into a folding device, so you double the width of this phone, you wind up with something that is taller than it is wide still. You wind up with a portrait tablet, which is what Samsung has done. But if you go the other way around and you start off with a tablet that is landscape, like the Oppo Find N, you see it there next to the, I think that's probably the Z Fold 3 given the timing, and then you fold it over, you wind up with a cover display that is a lot shorter and wider than a lot of people are probably going to want. So Google's solution to this is to just have a bezel. You take a pretty normal phone screen for your cover display. It's a little bit, maybe a little bit wider than the normal phone, but not much, right? Like it would totally look standard standing next to a normal phone. It would not stand out at all. And then you open it up, and now to get rid of the fact that you're slightly taller than you are wide, you just put a bezel on the top and the bottom, and you shrink the screen down. You put the camera up there so that you don't have to have a hole punch in your tablet screen, which to me, the tablet screen really does not need to have a hole punch. That's the screen that needs to be for media consumption, and therefore needs to be the most uninterrupted. The least interrupted maybe is a better way to say that. And I think you wind up with a device that is the best of both worlds. You wind up with something that does have a good-looking cover display. You have a tablet screen that is going to be much harder to have accidental presses on. Palm rejection won't need to be as big of a thing as it is on something like the Z Fold. and you don't have a hole punch there getting in the way, and you probably have a much better selfie camera for video calling or whatever you want to do than you would if you went with an under display camera, because your camera is just nestled up there in the bezel where it belongs. At any rate, I'd love to know what you guys think about this. Are you on the bezel bandwagon? Is it something that bothers you at all? Or are you someone like me that thinks that tiny, tiny bezels, while aesthetically pleasing, are often not all that functional? They do result in accidental presses. They make the device harder to use. And when we go hole punch, that's kind of ugly. When we go UDC, well, then your selfies are going to be kind of ugly as well. Let me know what you think about this in the comments down below. Sound off about the Google Pixel Fold as well. I'll see you on the next one. And until next time, stay nerdy, my friends.